Hello, all, and welcome to a new episode showcasing amazing female leaders and role models. Today's guest is an ardent promoter of female entrepreneurship and has been recognized among the top inspiring women in the Nordic tech scene. She leads Dell Technologies in Central and Eastern Europe, covering 31 countries from Israel to Poland. Having joined Dell as marketing director for the Nordic countries in the year 2000, she has since pursued an international career within Dell marketing, holding various regional and global roles. She has been in charge of Dell's CEE business since 2013. She oversees Dell Technologies entrepreneurship initiatives for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, and is a member of the Danish IT Association Board and chairman of the IT Association Steering Committee for Female IT Executives. In 2018, she has been appointed the chair of the Digital Skills and Jobs Coalition Governing Board at the European Union. Ladies and gents, please welcome my guest for the day, Anja Monrad. Welcome, Anja. What an honor to have you here.
Thanks, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm so excited. I want to say that I've been following your work for a few years, and for me, it's been really inspiring to see how you have navigated your career. And also, this year, you're again nominated for Nordic Women in Tech Awards, this time as Diversity Leader of the Year. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. Thanks.
But prior to that, you've also won the year before. So it's really amazing to keep seeing your career development. I really want to discuss with you today your career path, because for many young women and men today, having a corporate career, it's something that they really want to navigate properly. And they have really high expectations of how their career can look like, right? So I want to start by asking if you've ever planned your career, if you knew that at some point you're going to become an SVP.
Yes, I did. There's different types of people, and what works for one does not necessarily work for others, right? So what we're going to be talking about is a little bit of my experiences and my career path and the way that I've done it. And I hope that's going to inspire some, but it may not, be the same path and the same way of doing things, right? So back to your question. There are like two types of people: the ones that plan and do like to-do lists, and the ones that just go with the flow. And in the end, you may actually end up exactly the same place, right? But there's just different ways of getting there. So I've always had a plan. I had a plan on what I wanted to achieve, by when I wanted to achieve it. But it's not like I was stuck in, pursuing that pattern and it had to be that path. But it kind of gave me direction, and it motivated me to knowing that if I want to do this by that time, then I should probably just do a little bit of like planning backwards and say, if I want to do this at this point of time, what should I do now to get me there? And I also believe in the more you have a clear path lined up in your mind, the easier it is for you to articulate what you want to do. And if you articulate what you want to do, you can articulate, what help you need. And then, people can help you. So very long answer to a very short question. But yes, the answer is yes. I did have it kind of laid out in my mind.
No, but I love it because I feel that, right now, many of the listeners of this podcast are young and they do not know, maybe this is their first job. And they look at you and they're like, I want to be an SVP when I proceed with my career, right? When I navigate my career. But is there something in your upbringing that you think made you decide to have a plan? Was there any lesson or any model that you had in your childhood or growing up, thinking, okay, this is somebody that I really look up to, and if I really want to have this sort of life, I need to start planning or looking towards a specific path?
I've definitely had different role models in my childhood and in my career, but I wouldn't say that any of that actually made me be a planner, right? I think that's just my nature. I really like the fact I don't know if I can say I like it. I need the structure in my head to know what I need to do, by when I need to do it. And my friends and family are really making fun of me still because I am a to-do list person, right? I do structure things. So I think I've always been like that from early childhood. Of kind of like, hey, if this is what I need to do, then I need to do it like in these steps to get to that. But back to what we spoke about is like I have friends that have been going around doing trillions of different things, taking maybe you can call strange, it's not strange educations, but educations that are not naturally leading you to any senior roles, and getting there anyways, right? So if you're not on a clear path of education right now, don't go, oh my God, I missed my whole opportunity to become whatever I want to become, because there's trillions of ways to get to the goals, and many people even don't know what the goals are before they get there, and they land and they go, wow, this is where I like to be, right? So I think there are different ways of getting there. There's no wrong and right answers in this.
In hindsight, is there any lesson that you wish you knew about when deciding your path, for example, university?
Not anything that is like really like crossroads kind of like type of thing, but I would say that if I were to give myself an advice, it would be not to worry so much about things, and not to be afraid of making mistakes. And it sounds so mundane for old people like myself to say that, but and I know that when you're younger and more insecure and more ambitious, it sounds like, yeah, that's easy for you to say, but it is really that one thing. It's like that there is no risk in making mistakes. You can just go ahead and make the things that you're passionate about, and don't be so worried about things. But I wouldn't say that there were any like crossroads in the path.
You touched on something that I really planned to ask you in this interview, and I'm gonna continue with it because I think it's a natural transition. So most of my environment focuses on having as you said, a plan, but also trying to get there as fast as possible. We see around us role models that by the age of 30 are mentioned in Forbes, and it creates this competitive idea that by the age of 30, you must know what you are good at, and you must know that you will be a role model, or that you are a role model for your environment. And I feel that for some people, this is putting a lot of pressure to perform into some maybe unrealistic paths. Maybe it's not meant for you to be the CEO of a company by the age of 30, for example. What do you tell people that really feel like they're running out of time because they look at the environment? And what is your advice for them if they want to navigate a corporate career where things don't happen overnight?
Yeah, so I think the first thing, you mentioned the Forbes 30 or something. Just remember, it's 30 under 30 or 40 under 40. Just think about that in the context of, like, I don't know, 7-8 billion people in the world, right? So it's not like you look at that list and then you think, oh my God, why am I not on the list? And look at all of these amazing people. But it's not all of these amazing people, right? It's a very, very tiny portion of the it's like the Usain Bolt 100-meter sprints, kind of like. It's not everyone that's going to get on that list. That does not mean that you're not going to be super successful. You may just get there when you're 31 or 32, right? It's like so I think we need to put things in perspective as well sometimes, and stop putting so much pressure and ambition on ourselves. I think that there is different times of peaking in your career, right? And nobody says that in the age of 30 you should have accomplished everything. You're going to continue learning, you're going to continue developing, and you're going to experience different things at different times in your career. I would say, in corporate life, there is in some corporations, there is a path, and you have to do this before you can become that, and then you have to have this experience before you can become that, and that's going to take time. Other places are probably more risk taking in giving young people opportunities, and there you can jump things and really get ahead. But there is also, I think, maybe a time and a place for things. So let me give you an example. I was 23 when I graduated Copenhagen Business School. That's pretty young for graduating university, right? At least in Denmark, not necessarily everywhere in the world. But so at age 23, I started my first corporate job. And I was in IT sales after a couple of months, and that was not necessarily, having the being a 23-year-old young girl, I'm probably going to say, or young woman, coming out in a male-dominated IT environment and trying to convince them to invest, thousands of krona, millions of krona in IT equipment. And they just looked at me and kind of got like, so what do you know about anything? And at that point of time, my age was actually counterproductive, right? It's like, it was very, very difficult for me to gain the authority and the respect. I learned a lot from it because I learned that I needed to overcompensate on that. But at that point of time, my age was actually a little bit difficult for me. So sometimes, it's rushing into things is not necessarily going to make life easier for you. But if there's anyone from the corporate world listening to this podcast as well, and not just young people, I would say take risk on young people, right? Because somebody took risk on us when we were young and gave us opportunity. And I think the best thing we can do is sometimes, taking somebody that's young and bringing them forward and not waiting until they get a lot of experience, but just, believing and giving them opportunity.
So nurturing also the younger generations that are ambitious and they really want to perform and show that they can, in spite of all the other experiences you might have had. I really hope more people listen to this because I feel like there should be still a balance, right? So in many organizations, it's great to have young people who have maybe another perspective on things, and it's great to have experienced leaders who know exactly what direction the company should take. And looking at your career path, you've started in a corporate, as you mentioned, very young, and you've spent almost a decade before moving to Dell, and had several roles in the meantime. What was your, let's say, lesson prior to joining Dell that you think helped you, start that path of, what, from now on, I know I can plan my career and I know where I would like to go. What is something that you discovered in the first few years of your career that made you realize, this is really the path for me? And I'm asking this because there are people who, even if they have a very good path and they have good roles in other companies, they don't see themselves as being able to progress to that role that they maybe really want, like SVP or, I don't know, C-level in a obviously in a few years. But they don't see themselves as being able to do that. And maybe it's lack of confidence. Maybe it's just, not really a lot of experience or expertise to understand how that works. But what do you think they should maybe consider?
So if I were to give you one example of thing or things from my first couple of years where I really got some ideas on what I could and could not do. It's like I worked for Digital Equipment Corporation. It's a company that doesn't exist anymore. At that point of time, was the second largest IT company in the world, just following IBM. It got acquired by Compaq in '98. So in in my years in digital, I worked in sales for the first many years, and I was a young, ambitious salesperson, and I felt that I didn't really get the marketing support that I needed in my job, and I decided on my own to, first of all, I probably was very vocal around it, but then I decided, hey, there's so many things that I can do to compensate for that, and I started building my kind of like own marketing campaigns or CRM systems in Excel sheets and things. But I took initiative. I was like, hey, I'm just gonna do this because nobody else is doing this, and I think that I learned that there's way more to be done in most companies than people actually to do it, and you shouldn't be limited by your job scope or your job title, or if there's something that you can engage in and you can do that's going to help, both the company forward and yourself learn and develop, right? So in many cases, people get a little bit tied up in, hey, that's not my job, and nobody else is doing it, but it's not my job. It's like, if nobody else is doing it and you want it done and it's not your job, maybe there's an opportunity for you to engage in it and actually get it done and learn something from it, and and bring things forward. So rather than focusing on whose job is it, it's like, hey, can I engage in this, and can I learn something from doing that? And I think that I learned in my first years that there is way more to be done than people to do. And nobody's going to say, hey, no, we don't want you to do that. Nobody else is going to do it, but we definitely don't want you to do it. Everyone is going to go, hey, if nobody else is doing it and you want to do it, go ahead, be my guest and do that. So taking the initiative and driving things. And I think that that learning from back then, when I started building my own CRM systems in Excel, that helped me in my many years in Dell later, of going, there is no limits. If nobody has done it and you need it done, go ahead, try and get it done. And that has definitely helped me in my career.
And I think that links very well with basically expanding your role if you don't have the setup that you think you need in order to do even a better job, because maybe nobody else has, I don't know, the skills or the time to think about that specific role that you might see, adding to your position right now. I think that's very, very good advice for people who feel like they're in companies where they don't get enough support. Which happens, especially in startups. And it's, like you said, a great opportunity also to progress and show that you have more skills than maybe what you were hired for.
Yeah.
So very, very nicely added. Was there, what's the best piece of advice that you got in your first year of navigating your career? So before you knew that, this is a path that I would want to take on. When you started, marketing look different. You said yourself that you started with marketing campaigns, you started looking into CRM systems. That's still something that companies look into today, deciding on the software, deciding on the campaign. So it's like ongoing work. But what was the best piece of advice that you received navigating your first years of your career?
So so was definitely, the most important piece of advice was, believing in yourself and having that self-confidence, and not holding yourself back. And that is so much easier to say than actually to do, right? So when I say that to you, to young people, and even not necessarily just young people today, and I say, don't hold yourself back, let your voice be heard, trust yourself and your opinions. I can see and I can hear myself saying it, and I can see myself in their eyes going, yeah, that's easy for you to say, right? And I still have situations where, I'm holding myself back and I feel insecure, and I think everyone does that, right? So I think that's that's always going to be a piece of advice. But I always laugh when I get the question, because I had a boss a couple of years ago that always in the most nice way, when I was about to go on stage and do something, or about to go into a meeting and do something, he would just look at me and apologies my language now, and he would just look at me and say, "Don't fuck it up." Right. And that was and he didn't mean it in the way of, he meant it in the most loving way, and that was just his way of going, "Hey, you can do this." Right. So every time I'm being asked what is the best advice I've ever got, it is basically don't fuck it up. That's the best advice I've ever received. But that when I think about that, every time I need to go and perform, I just think of him, and I think of when he said that, and I know that he meant, "Hey, I know you can do it, so don't put any, boundaries and constraints on yourself."
And moving towards your career path now to becoming a senior vice president, I want to know what were some of the obstacles that you had to overcome? You had a plan, but obviously your plan will not work from the first try. You probably need to go and ask for things every now and then, right? Yeah. What were some of the obstacles? And then we're going to deep dive into how to deal with them if you're having the same trajectory.
Yeah. So I think there's definitely a couple of things. So, it would not be right for me to go through all of this without talking about being a woman in IT, right? Because I would say definitely throughout my career, the whole gender thing have been in some cases a little bit of an obstacle, right? On the other hand, it's always also been a great opportunity for me to stand out in many cases, because I was the only woman or the only female in the room, and hence easier to remember and to recognize, right? But I would say in many years of my career, there was and there still is many places, there was this stereotype view of what a successful leader was, or what a successful leader do, and how they behave, and how they talk, and how they articulate problems and solutions. And if you're not that, if you're a different type of leader, then you may not have been seen as the stereotype successful leader. So I would say that had definitely been an obstacle. And I had to learn to, in some cases, adapt to be in the environment that I was in. And also in some cases, just feel grounded in being myself and saying, I am who I am, the way that I am. And then, I will eventually convince people that that's okay. And maybe even better than okay. So I would say that's one part of it. The other part of obstacles, so to say, is in bigger organizations, you will, in many cases, unfortunately, run into politics, and you will run into this whole environment of promoting promotion paths. There's multiple people on paths. There's not that many spaces for promotions, and you may run into politics, and the politics may be bad bosses that are not grounded, that are not feeling confident, that are not able to promote themselves and their teams, and then get into politics with other bosses, and you may get caught in that. And I would say I experienced that in my career as well. So there's kind of like a little bit of politics, and then the whole bias that have existed and to some extent still exist against women in business.
And for women listening that have this exact feeling that, let's say they're not promoted because the idea of the next role to fill is not them, what do you tell them? How can we navigate this setup that it's obviously extremely uncomfortable if you know this is the reason, but what can you do to navigate that setup?
Yeah. So first of all, I need to say that be careful about not just defining that as a reason, right? I've had career conversations with both men and women, but let's stick to the women example in this case. With women that would say, I didn't get promoted because I was a woman, and they promoted this man instead of me. And I could sit back and say, hey, I was part of the discussions. And I can tell you that's not the reason you didn't get promoted. The reason was that he was better than you, and you're not ready, right, at this point of time. So there is also the risk that, it's easier maybe sometimes to gravitate to the explanation of there's all of these things happening to me rather than this is what I can do to change, right? So that said, because this is not just about women leaning in, I think that there's a lot of women that are leaning in all the time and then still not getting promoted, right? So I would say that, if that's the sense of you are in an organization where there is a lot of unconscious bias and you're being stagnated because of that, obviously speak up and have conversations around, what can we do to change the environment. But if you can't change the environment, go pack your stuff and go somewhere else, right? Life is too short for companies that are not supportive of a diverse and inclusive culture. And with the hunt of talent that exists in today's world, companies will change. If good talent disappear because that it's not a diverse and inclusive environment, over time they will change. But you don't have to waste your time while they figure it out, right? So try and change the environment. If it doesn't work, pack up and go somewhere that actually will do that. But focus on, delivering the right results. Focus on your own skills. Don't focus on what the world is doing to you, because then you can get into this victimized position that doesn't help anyone.
Definitely. I've recently had a live Q&A with a previous podcast guest that talked about the victim's consciousness and this idea of putting yourself in a situation where you think you cannot get out of, which is not true. So I definitely think that your advice is very well received for those who feel like maybe it's not their place in the organizations they're in. What do you think about looking back and in hindsight? Is there something that you would do differently navigating your career and knowing all of the things that you know now? And let me give you an example. There are young women now who work in corporate, and let's say they've been with the company for 3, 5, 7 years. However, they do not have that support to be, given different opportunities, and they feel like they could be able to deliver if they were given that opportunity. For those of the listeners who do want to navigate the corporate ladder and who do see themselves staying with the company, but they don't know what to expect from the company, they don't get the support of, we will continue to invest in you because we really like, what you do. And it's not that it's not true. It's just that maybe they don't find the support in the current situation. What do you advise them? Like, what, maybe not necessarily to do something, but the mindset, or how do you feel they should look at this situation that they're in?
And I think there's a couple of things. Like one thing is ask for help. And I think, you said maybe they're not getting it, but then go ask again and go and ask somebody else. Ask for help, not in the way that you can't, manage yourself, but ask for sponsorship. And I think that there's a difference things between, asking for coaching or asking for mentoring, and then actually asking for sponsorship. Go and ask people that have influence and say, hey, I need you to become my sponsor. And, I need you because I understand you can't sponsor me before you know me. So I would really like you to get to know me, because I need your help in sponsoring me in this organization. And I've had great mentors, but the ones that have had most influence on my career have been the sponsors, the few people in the organization that said, hey, I'm going to go and I'm going to fight for you because I know you can deliver, and I know that you're the right one to go and promote. So, speak up and ask. And most people are actually going to be super helpful and supportive. And if they're not, ask for honest opinions, right? It's like, what do I need to do for you to be comfortable of sponsoring me, right? And then having that conversation. But the other advice I would give is really don't take anything personal. It's really about the job you do, the outcome of that. It's not about you. So when you get feedback, it's not you not being good enough, but sometimes maybe the output and the job you did was not good enough. And that's okay. You're going to learn from that and hopefully not do it again over and over again, but learn from the mistakes, but don't take things, personal. And I think in the first many years of my career, I took things very personal. If I got negative feedback on something, I would be devastated. And emotionally, that hit me very hard until, I got to the point where, hey, I'm good enough and that's me. But sometimes, the outcome of what I did was just not good. And I need to learn from that and do that better.
What was the biggest surprise of your career?
The biggest surprise of my career, I think the biggest surprise, if I were to think about what I know now versus what I think when I looked at it, is work-life balance. I think that I thought that the more the higher in the corporate ladder or the bigger job, the more workload and the harder it's going to get. And I think the surprise that I actually realized is that the more senior you get, the better your work-life balance gets. So actually, the more responsibility you get, the bigger team you get, the more senior your role is, the easier it gets to navigate all of that. Part of it is obviously because you get more experience. Part of it is you get a little bit less stressed about things and deal with the things. But a very, very big part of it is you're much more in control of your time. And that makes it possible for you to decide and structure and schedule your work, and then navigate that balance with your non-work time as well.
So if you were to say that now in an executive setup, would this be the most rewarding activity of working in this setup, the fact that you have work-life balance, or that you've reached a level of work-life balance you didn't really expect?
I would say it's definitely not the most rewarding part, but it's a very, very nice benefit, side effect and side benefit of reaching that level. I would say the most rewarding thing is being able to see the organization develop. It's the influence you can have through your leadership on other people's lives, and hopefully having an influence on other people's lives in the right and good way, and impacting their lives to develop and to do something better. That is definitely, for me personally, the most rewarding thing.
That sounds really great, and I'm very happy I get to get all these pieces of advice from you, because I would actually would like to continue on this path of, thinking about advice for people who see. We've touched upon it a bit earlier, but people who see their career as it must be a maximum 2 years role in this company or in this specific setup, because if not, when I go to the next challenge, they will say I stayed too long in this role, right? So right now there's this setup in certain tech companies. or not necessarily, where at some point you've being asked, why did you spend 4 years in this company and you only had 2 changes of position, right? So obviously this is a bit different than in some corporate setups where you need to stay for a while just to understand the different particularities of the job. What do you tell people that really feel this pressure of always looking for the next thing, and they're never really satisfied with staying more than a year or two in a position? What do you tell them in hindsight?
No, I think it is a marathon. It's not a sprint, right? And I think you can get to the career ambitions without having to do tons of sprints, but do a marathon. And in some cases, you go a little bit faster. In some cases, you go a little bit slower. You do lateral moves. In some cases, you may actually do a step back to do a lateral move to then go up. It's not necessarily always a straight line up or a spiral up, right? Because sometimes there's different ways you can get to the same positions. So I think that's definitely part of it. In Dell, I've been in Dell for 20 years, right? So I've definitely exceeded my 2 years or 4 years. But we definitely had the same thing. We would rotate people more or less every 2 years. And if you look at my CV in very detailed, because I've collapsed a lot of the roles together, otherwise it becomes very, very long, right? But if you really look at it in details, you will see those 2 years kind of like rotations. I think it's great to get good experience and move and do a lot of things and build on your toolbox. On the other hand, you need to stay long enough to actually start contributing in your role, right? And the risk is, and we more or less know that for the first 6 months you're in a learning mode. You're learning more than you're actually contributing. Then you start contributing in your role, and then at some point of time you peak. And then you stop learning, you start adding new value, and then it's time for you probably to move on to something else, right? So it's about finding that perfect time where you're peaking, where and then start leaving before you start deteriorating your impact on what you're doing. But if you're on the move way too fast all the time, you're actually never going to find the right balance of contributing and and learning or moving, right? And I think it's important to find that balance between, hey, now I'm learning mode, now I'm in the contribution, it's a balance. And when it starts being out of balance because you're not learning anymore, you will stop contributing over time, and then it's time to move on to the next thing. But rotating way too fast, you're never going to actually prove that you can deliver something. And I think that's important too.
Definitely. So to consider the fact that at the end of the day, you should also prove some of the work you've done in your roles in order to be able to go on to the next one and continue to impact. Were there any situations for you? Actually, I'm sure there were, but were there any particular situations where you had to go, so to speak, through fire, a very difficult setup for you? There are different, challenges in navigating a career. And what would you tell people that sometimes are in these very difficult situations where they really feel like this is it? Like, such a setup where I really feel stressed and this is a very difficult situation. It can be anything from, now with COVID, a lot of managers have had to lay off a lot of their employees, and it's a very difficult setup. What do you advise people that listen to this interview and that see your role as really, contributing to the conversation?
So I think, the difficult situation can come in many, many different versions, right? You mentioned, sorry, apologies. You mentioned the COVID current situation with the pandemic. Obviously that's a very, very special situation. and that puts stress on everyone. And the thing to remember here is, in normal leadership situations, or just in normal life, when you have a difficult situation at work, people would then, gravitate to being, your home and your family being your safe haven, right? That's where you can go back and you can get some energy, and then you can cope with the stressful situation at work. Sometimes, the home environment is a stressful situations, um, people going through divorces or breakups or illness, and then work becomes a little bit of a safe haven where you can kind of like go and get your mind off. Or you have your friends and society and sports, and so you either have like your family life, your society friend life, or your work life, and normally you can find a place to go and get a little bit of energy. And this corona situation is very special in the sense that there is none of these three places that have been not stressful, right? So there's been stress on the work, stress on the family, with children being at home, everyone working from home. You were deprived your opportunity to be with your friends or do sports in fitness centers and things. So there's been maximum of stress in all three layers. So I think it's a very, very special situation that we can't really, put a lot of advice on, other than, maintain your personal health by exercising and eating healthy, because we know that's going to help no matter what. It's like, take care of your body, right? So that's one part. But other situations, with being in difficult situations in the career, I learned, and I have definitely been in difficult situations throughout my career, but I learned that the more stakeholders you work with, and the better stakeholder management you do, the better positioned you are. Because if you are limiting your area of contacts and influence and relationships, and some of those get stressed, you have a limited, portfolio of people to turn to. The better you are at stakeholder management, the better you are at managing a bigger group of people and engaging with a bigger group. If you get stressed in one area, you can always turn to someone else and get help and support from someone else. And I think I learned at some point of time in my career, I was so focused on delivering and doing the right thing and doing what I've been asked to do, and working that I forgot managing, the whole environment of stakeholders. And when that working relationship with my boss did not work out, and I have been so focused on just that, I realized I didn't have a lot of others to support me around. So just continuously just making sure that you manage stakeholders, that gives you so much more people that can actually support and sponsor you.
Definitely. You've shared so many great pieces of advice, and I hope that listeners will find it very useful, not only in navigating a corporate career, but also if they have, any sort of unclarities about their setup and they don't know how to navigate generally their life and career. Is there anything you would like to sum up with for the listeners that maybe you wanted to mention throughout the interview?
Um, No, I think we covered most of the things. Actually, you great questions, and in guiding this, I would say that most companies really need young talent. Not most, every company needs young talent, and in Dell we've done a lot of things with reverse mentoring, having young people mentor more experienced leaders, and educate more experienced leaders in a lot of different things, from social media usage, to new things that have been developed in research, and other things that you have learned in throughout your educations. So there's so much that young people can contribute, and just don't hold yourself back. go in, believe in that you can do it, but just remember that it is a marathon. You're not necessarily going to make it in the first year after graduation. That does not mean you have failure. That's just very, very normal. You need to get in and get some experience. I would say don't fuck it up, as my previous boss said. Just believe in it and that you can do it. And then, if there's one piece of advice, is just remember, no matter what, it is just a job, right? So, do what you really like to do. If you're passionate around it, you're going to be good at it. But it is, in most cases, just a job. I love my job, but it's just a job. And if it's not that, it's going to be another job. So don't let that identify you and be, your identification of who you are, because it's not. So I would leave it with that, I think.
How powerful. I love that you've mentioned that. I feel that sometimes people are really drained to feel that their job is also their identity, as you said, and then they don't know what to do when they don't have that job, or when they realize the job is not what they want to grow into, right? So thank you so much for this. Thank you so much for your time. It's been such an honor to converse with you, and I'm sure that the listeners found it very, very, very insightful.
Thanks, Alexandra. It's really been a pleasure to participate. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you all for listening, and stay tuned for more inspiring interviews with female role models.